Shabbat Shalom. There is so much damage that has been done by textbooks for children when it comes to the Tanakh, when it comes to the Bible. For example, if I were to ask you about the stories that we've been reading for the last couple of weeks, in particular the story of Isaac at the end of his life, growing blind in his eyes, and then his sons, Jacob and Esau, well, having a bit of a falling out over the seeking of his blessing. In particular, Jacob going to his father, wearing his brother's clothes. Imagine, how old was Jacob when that took place? What's that? Well, come back. How old do you imagine? How old is he usually portrayed in books and animation, in the narratives given to small children? He's like a teenager, right? I mean, come on, let's be honest. We usually imagine him as being a young man. His mama is telling him what to do, and he's going to his dad, and he's really kind of shy, and then he runs off and ends up getting married. And when he's there at the well, when he meets Rachel the first time, he's full of bravado and feats of strength that show off to the girl that he fancies. I mean, he really behaves in a way that most of us would associate with a typical teenager or maybe early 20s. When we do the math, he was, depending upon which tradition you're reading, either 77 years old or 60 years old. 60 is the more traditional Jewish reading because we believe that in between leaving his home and ending up at Lavan's, he took a period of study, but that's a whole nother conversation. But wait, that changes the narrative a little bit. He's now a much older man, much more mature, should be able to say no to his mom. But I suppose all the dates for the ages of the people back then tend to skew a little bit old. They didn't have Isaac until they were 100 years old, so maybe it's not so far off to imagine that this was normal for that particular generation, or at least the way they counted the years of that generation. But it also reveals a different conundrum, which is, well, wait, how old was Isaac at that point? Because if you did your homework, and by homework I mean you read the entire Torah portion, we find out how old Isaac is when he dies, which is 180 years old. Happens at the very end, almost the very end of this week's Torah portion. Well, he's 180 years old when he dies, and it's after Jacob returns and has all of his kids. Then that means that initial scene where he is lying in bed and feeling in his blindness for his son to give him a blessing, he didn't die at that moment. He thought, I'm about to die, I need to give a blessing. Esau, go get me some good meat, and then I'll give you a full-hearted blessing. And it set all of this in motion, and he was wrong. In fact, he lived 60 years after that blessing. He lived 60 years after this episode where he thought he was about to pass from the world, and which set in motion all of the strife. Well, didn't set in motion all the strife, it forced all of the strife in the family to come to the surface, as is often the case, and lead to Jacob running and then all of the difficulties with his family. Isaac got it wrong. Isaac was wrong about when he was about to pass. He was 60 years wrong. Now, what could have led him to that mistake? Well, simply put, Isaac made the mistake of believing that contentment was the final state that should be sought, and that when one was truly content, that one would then pass from this world. After all, he saw that his father was content when he passed. Abraham had been satisfied with all things, and therefore left the world. So for him, who had also reached a point of contentment, he believed that this was his final moments. And that's not what contentment is meant to be. Too often in pop psychology, self-help books, and many other sources, people will act like contentment is the goal. That's what we are striving for. That moment of peace and contentment, the final sigh of satisfaction. And what they don't seem to understand is that contentment is actually a precondition, not an end condition. Contentment is something that we seek as the beginning of our true journey rather than as the fulfillment of our journey. You see, contentment is another way of saying no longer subject to the Yetzer Hara, no longer subject to the evil inclination. And let me explain that a little bit in more detail, because too often, like so many other things, the idea of the evil inclination has been clouded and changed by presentations to children, sometimes from even outside of our own community. If we say the evil forces that tempt you, people immediately imagine pitchforks, horns, and red-skinned devils. And that is not what we mean by the Yetzer Hara in Judaism. It is the opposite of contentment. Pure and simple. It is naked ambition. The Yetzer Hara wants more. The Yetzer Hara is not satisfied. And the Yetzer Hara then gives you that shove to go for more, to take more, to grab more, to do more, because you're not satisfied with what you have. Now, the rabbis were very understanding, and they said, look, in a small measure, that's perfectly acceptable. A little, punch to get you up and sow the field with your grain in order that you'll actually have enough to eat, that's okay. Wanting enough is fine, and the Yetzer Hara, that little bit of push will do that. Wanting to have a house rather than sleeping out in the field, the Yetzer Hara can give you that push and get you up and take care of that. But that's not what we should be using as our benchmark for all things. And in fact, we shouldn't even use it as a benchmark for those things that we do need. We can allow it to fuel a little bit of our energy, but ultimately we should be seeking to be able to know to do the right even when we don't desire the right, even when we're not jealous of what we want, even if we are not passionate about something, but to have it in this acquisitive way, in this grasping way, we can still search and seek and reach while being content. This is the ultimate goal that Judaism wants us to have as the beginning of our ultimate journey in this life. Imagine, if you will, you're going through this life. There are things that you are trying to do, but you're not doing it out of a sense of desperation. You're not doing it out of a sense of, I am lacking. I have a hole within my life that must be filled by this new object, by this new task at my job, by this new person that I am infatuated with, that I am incomplete until I have. Take away that motivation. Be content in the moment that you are in. Right now, right here, this is enough. I don't need more. I don't need extra. I don't need different. This moment right here, I am willing to say is good, that I am blessed. When we say that with our heart, when we allow ourselves to feel contentment in the moment, no matter how inadequate it may seem by some other measure, by the measure of the Yetzer Hara that tells me I deserve more, need more, must have more, if we can ignore that voice and be content wherever we are, it does not mean that we stop. This is the great lie that is preached, that if you are too content, that somehow you stop doing. Far from it. When you are truly content, you are now free to do what ought to be done, rather than what you are doing out of a sense of panic, jealousy, or fear. Contentment gives us a foundation so that as we make our choices of what do I do next, what do I seek tomorrow, we are not doing it blinded by the Yetzer Hara. We are not doing it blinded by the sense of all-consuming desire for something that will somehow complete and fix us and fix our lives. Instead, we're doing it because we can see that it is right to do. It is right to sow the field, to lay down the seeds so that there will be grain for a next harvest. That is right. It doesn't have to come from panic. It doesn't have to come from hoping I will have more than my neighbor. It doesn't have to come with hoping that I'll be able to sell it and then buy a bigger house. It can just simply come with, at this moment, it is right to do. And that's what Isaac misunderstood. He thought that once you were truly content, you were done. But if we seek contentment earlier, if we allow contentment to wash over us at a younger age, then we can recognize there is so much left to be done. And indeed, Isaac went on. to live a good, full life after having achieved that point, that state of contentment. Sadly, it took his sons much longer to reach that point. We can see that Jacob eventually gets there when he meets Pharaoh and has been reunited with his family. He finally recognizes that point of contentment and then lives for another 17 years. Esau never quite gets there, for he still measures contentment, as we saw in his reunification with his brother, in his possessions. And for the moment, he feels he has enough, at least in the conversation with his brother. But, of course, Edom did not feel that way when they looted Jerusalem alongside the Romans. The contentment of the material was fleeting. To be content with what we have is the measure of wealth, says our sages. Whatever our portion is, we must seek to be content there. Content not meaning that we do not continue to work. Content not meaning that we don't have effort, that we don't try to build more. But content meaning whether we are successful in the next or not, we are still going to be grateful for today. We are still going to find peace in this moment. It is hard, which is why Isaac thought it was the end. But it is ultimately what allows us to truly live in this world, making those choices that we've been talking about for the last month and a half, without that unfortunate leash of the Yetzer Hara pulling us in all the crazy directions that it tries to make us run. If we can cut that pull, allow ourselves to be content, then we can move towards the life that we are meant to live, and a life that will be much more blessed than one that is simply made up of grabbing more and more and more. Shabbat Shalom.